I always thought family meant forever, until I realized forever had an expiration date the moment I stopped being useful to them. Growing up, I was the invisible one, the quiet sister, the helper in the background, the one who ironed dresses and fixed hair while others took pictures. I used to think that maybe one day they'd see me, that one day my efforts would earn a seat at the same table. But the truth is, they never planned to save me a seat. They only ever needed me standing behind them, holding the camera. It started 2 months ago. My older sister Clara was getting married. She was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. My mother used to say, "Lucy, learn from your sister." My father would nod in agreement, pretending it wasn't favoritism, just motivation. But even as a child, I could feel the difference. Clara's birthday cakes had golden candles. Mine came from the discount aisle. Her mistakes were learning experiences. Mine were disappointments. Still, I smiled through it all. Because deep down, I believed family love wasn't something you earned. It was something you were given. I was wrong. I found out about the wedding not from an invitation but from Instagram. My cousin tagged Clara in a post, "Can't wait for your big day." Family wedding, yarr, so excited. And my heart sank. My hands shook as I scrolled through comments, each one confirming what I already knew. They hadn't told me. Not a text, not a call, not a mention. Just silence. It wasn't an oversight. It was deliberate. I was being erased quietly, politely, cruelly. That night, I sat in my small apartment, staring at the screen until my tears blurred the words. I kept refreshing the page as if somehow an invitation would magically appear in my inbox. But the silence was louder than any rejection letter. I replayed every memory, every smile I'd given them, every favor I'd done, every time I swallowed my pride when they humiliated me. And for what? To be invisible at the one event that was supposed to unite us? For a week, I didn't sleep. I went to work, smiled at customers, and came home to cry quietly over dinner. My roommate Mia noticed. She was everything my family wasn't, kind, direct, and unafraid of truth. "You know they did it on purpose, right?" she said one evening as she handed me a glass of wine. "They wanted you to feel left out. Because people like that thrive on power. You showing up would have stolen their spotlight." I wanted to argue, to defend them, but I couldn't. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. It was control disguised as care. Love with conditions, acceptance with expiry. But something inside me shifted that night. A quiet defiance like a whisper saying, "You've been small for too long." I looked at the calendar, saw the wedding date circled on my sister's post, and decided I would go. Not because I wanted their approval, but because I refused to let them write me out of my own family story. If they wanted to hide me, I would make sure they couldn't ignore me. The weeks that followed were strange. Every morning I felt fear and excitement in equal measure. Fear of what they'd say when they saw me. Excitement at the thought of reclaiming something they took from me, my voice. I didn't tell anyone except Mia. She grinned when I said I was going. "Good," she said. "Go not to be seen, go to see. Go for closure, not validation." We spent hours finding the perfect dress. Nothing extravagant, nothing screaming for attention. Just something that said I'm here and I belong. It was a deep burgundy gown, elegant, timeless, the color of quiet strength. When I looked in the mirror for the first time, I didn't see the overlooked sister. I saw a woman who'd stopped apologizing for existing. The morning of the wedding, I woke before sunrise. My heart was pounding, my palms sweaty, but my mind was strangely clear. I got dressed slowly, brushing through memories as I brushed my hair. I remembered the times I helped Clara rehearse her vows for school speeches, how she'd laugh when I tripped over my words. How she once said, "Lucy, you'll never be the one in front. You're just better behind the scenes." Maybe she was right back then, but not anymore. I arrived at the venue, a glass-walled garden overlooking the city. Cars lined the street, filled with guests wearing pastel perfection. My reflection shimmered in the car window as I stepped out. The security guard at the gate checked his list. "Name?" he asked. I hesitated, then smiled. "Lucy Thompson." He flipped through his clipboard. I knew my name wasn't there. I'm family, I added softly, before he could say anything else. There must have been something in my tone because he stepped aside without a word. Maybe it was confidence. Maybe it was fate. As I walked in, everything hit me at once. The laughter, the perfume, the sparkle of chandeliers, and the sting of being surrounded by people who didn't expect me. Heads turned. Conversations paused. Clara froze mid-laugh when she saw me from across the hall. Her expression faltered for just a second before she smiled tightly, pretending she wasn't shocked. "Lucy," she said when I reached her. "You came." Her voice was polite, restrained. Behind her smile, I saw panic. "Of course," I replied, matching her tone. "I wouldn't miss your big day." The silence around us was heavy. My mother's eyes darted between us. My father's jaw tightened. The bridesmaids whispered. I felt their judgment pressing against my skin, but I stood tall. For once, I wasn't the quiet one shrinking away. I was the storm they didn't expect to weather. Then something unexpected happened. A man, tall, calm, with kind eyes, stepped forward from the group. He looked unfamiliar yet oddly grounded, like he didn't belong to the chaos around us. "You must be Lucy," he said, offering his hand. "Clara's sister, right? I'm Daniel." His tone was warm, genuine, and for a fleeting second I felt seen. Not as the forgotten sibling, but as a person. We talked briefly, about nothing and everything. About how beautiful the ceremony looked, how perfect the weather was. And yet, beneath it all, I felt something quietly shifting. It wasn't attraction, not yet. It was recognition. He didn't look through me. He looked at me. And that was something I hadn't felt in years. As the ceremony began, I sat in the back row. The vows echoed through the garden like scripted poetry. Everyone smiled, everyone clapped, and I watched in silence. When Clara's eyes met mine during her vows, I saw something flicker, guilt maybe. But it didn't matter anymore. I wasn't there to be part of their performance. I was there to write my own ending. During the reception, people avoided me politely. They smiled but didn't speak. My parents stayed close to Clara like I were contagious. I almost left, but Daniel found me again. "You look like you could use some air," he said. We stepped outside into the cool night, the city lights painting soft reflections on the glass. "You don't seem like the rest of them," he said after a pause. I laughed bitterly. "That's because I'm not. I wasn't even supposed to be here." He looked at me for a long time, understanding dawning in his expression. "Then I'm glad you came," he said simply. For a moment, the noise faded. There, in the middle of a wedding I was never meant to attend, I felt peace. Not revenge, not rage, just release. Like stepping out of a shadow I didn't know I'd been living in. When I left that night, I didn't look back. My family still stood in their perfect circle, pretending everything was fine. But I knew what they didn't, that love isn't found in approval or appearances. Sometimes it's found in defiance, in the quiet courage of showing up when they said you shouldn't. And as I walked away from that glittering hall, Daniel's words echoed softly in my mind, words that would stay with me long after that night ended. Sometimes, "Lucy," he had said, "the best revenge is living like you never needed their permission to be happy." I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my balcony with a blanket around my shoulders, the city lights flickering below me, and the sound of distant laughter still echoing in my head. My sister's wedding was over, but the heaviness lingered like perfume after the party. I kept replaying the moment I saw their faces, my mother's shock, my father's tight jaw, Clara's forced smile. For years I craved their acceptance. But that night, standing in that room full of polished lies, I realized something I should have seen long ago. They didn't love me because they didn't understand me. And maybe that was okay. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You left without saying goodbye." "Daniel." My chest tightened, not out of fear but surprise. I hadn't given him my number, but then again, in families like mine, everyone's connected somehow. I hesitated before replying. I didn't think anyone would notice I was gone. A minute later, his reply came, "I noticed." That one word, noticed, felt heavier than any apology my family could ever give. Because it wasn't pity. It was present. Daniel had seen me in a room full of people who'd spent years pretending I didn't exist. Over the next few days, we started talking. At first, just simple exchanges. About the wedding, the food, the awkwardness. Then slowly about deeper things, family, expectations, loneliness. I learned he was the groom's cousin, an architect who had recently moved back from overseas. "I came back for family," he'd said, and then remembered why I left. We laughed at that, not because it was funny, but because it was too real. He didn't ask me why I wasn't invited. He didn't need to. Some silences explain themselves. 2 weeks passed before we met again. He invited me to a small art exhibit downtown. "No weddings, no expectations, just something real," his message said. I almost didn't go. Part of me was still scared that this was temporary, that kindness was just a setup for disappointment. But something about Daniel felt different. There was no performance in him, no polished charm. He spoke softly, like someone who had seen enough of the world to understand pain without asking for proof. When I arrived, he smiled. Genuinely, not the polite kind of smile people wear at events. The gallery was quiet, filled with paintings of broken clocks, fractured mirrors, and flowers growing through concrete. "This artist paints resilience," he said as we walked through. "Beauty that comes from things refusing to die." I looked at a canvas showing a wilted rose standing tall through cracks of stone and whispered, "That's how it feels, doesn't it? To bloom where no one expects you to." He looked at me then, not just at my face, but into something deeper. "Exactly," he said softly. "And sometimes the people who try to bury you are the same ones who teach you how to rise." We talked for hours. About the weight of being the disappointment, the one who doesn't fit the family mold. He told me his parents had once called him the failure with a degree, because he chose art over finance. I told him how my mother once said, "Lucy, not everyone is meant to shine. Some people are just born to support others." He laughed bitterly and said, "And yet here you are, still shining anyway." That night, when we parted ways, he hugged me. It wasn't romantic, it was understanding. A rare, quiet connection between two people who'd both been made to feel small and had learned, in different ways, to grow beyond it. A few days later, my family called. Not to apologize, of course, but to talk things through. Clara wanted to meet for coffee, just to clear the air. I hesitated. I knew what that meant. She didn't want to clear the air. She wanted to control the narrative. But I agreed, because closure, I realized, sometimes comes disguised as confrontation. We met at a polished cafe uptown, the kind where people smile too much and mean too little. She arrived in white, as if she were still the bride. Her tone was casual, but her eyes were sharp. "Lucy," she began, "I was surprised to see you at the wedding." "Were you?" I asked calmly. "Or were you just upset I ruined your perfect photo album?" Her jaw tightened. "That's not fair. It wasn't personal. It was just complicated." "Complicated," I repeated, tasting the word like poison. "It's funny how everything becomes complicated when it involves treating me like family," she sighed. "You always make things dramatic." I smiled, a sad, tired smile. Maybe because I was taught that silence gets you erased. There was a long pause. She sipped her coffee, then said, "Look, I didn't mean to hurt you. But you showing up like that, it made things awkward. And that's the problem, isn't it?" I said softly. "You care more about appearances than people." She rolled her eyes. "You've always been sensitive." "No," I corrected. "I've always been honest. You just call it sensitive because honesty doesn't fit your story." That's when she said it, the line that broke something in me. "You'll understand one day, Lucy. Not everyone deserves a place at the table." For years, I'd let her words define me. But this time, I looked her in the eye and said, "Then I'll build my own table. And I'll make sure everyone who's been left out has a seat." She blinked, caught off guard. There was nothing more to say. I stood up, paid for my coffee, and walked out. The air outside felt lighter, cleaner, like I'd finally taken off a dress that never fit. That night, I told Daniel what happened. He listened quietly, his expression unreadable until I finished. Then he said, "You know what's beautiful about this?" "What?" "You didn't go there for revenge, Lucy. You went there for release. That's growth most people never reach." I smiled faintly. "It still hurts." "Of course it does," he said gently. "Healing always hurts at first. But you're not that girl who waited for their invitation anymore. You showed up for yourself." We walked along the riverside after that, city lights shimmering on the water. I told him about my childhood, the birthday parties where I wasn't allowed to invite friends, the graduation they missed because of Clara's trip, the years I thought love was something you had to earn. He didn't interrupt. He just listened. And in that silence, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. At one point, he turned to me and said, "You know what I realized about people like your family?" "What?" "They mistake control for love. They don't know how to give without taking. But you still love without expecting anything back." That's rare. His words hit me harder than I expected. Because he was right. Despite everything, I still wanted to forgive them. Not for their sake, but for mine. Carrying hate felt like wearing their shadow. And I was tired of walking in the dark. When we reached the bridge, he stopped and looked at me. "Lucy, don't let them define what love looks like for you. Find it in the small things, in laughter, in freedom, in yourself. That's where it really lives." I didn't realize I was crying until he brushed away a tear with his thumb. It wasn't romantic. It was human. And in that moment, standing under a sky full of city lights, I understood what he meant. Love wasn't grand gestures or perfect pictures. It was quiet, patient, and kind, the kind that didn't need validation or applause. In the days that followed, I started living differently. I deleted old photos that made me feel small. I stopped stalking their social media pages, stopped waiting for acknowledgement. I began journaling, writing about pain not as tragedy but as transformation. And somewhere between the silence and the sunrise, I realized I was healing. Daniel and I kept meeting. Sometimes for coffee, sometimes for long drives with no destination. We talked about art, music, life, and all the versions of ourselves we'd had to bury to make others comfortable. With him, I didn't have to prove anything. I could just be, and that was new. One evening, as we watched the sunset from a hilltop, he said, "Do you ever think about how different your story could have been if they'd just loved you right?" I thought for a moment, then said quietly, "Maybe. But then I wouldn't have learned how to love myself." He smiled. "That's the real victory, Lucy. Not getting even, getting free." And he was right. Because the more I found peace in myself, the less power they had over me. Their silence no longer felt like rejection. It felt like space. Space to grow, to breathe, to rebuild. And maybe, just maybe, to love again. That night, before I went to sleep, I looked at the burgundy dress hanging by my door, the one I wore to the wedding they tried to hide. I ran my hand along the fabric and whispered to myself, "You didn't show up to make them regret losing you. You showed up to remember who you were before they forgot your worth, and that realization changed everything." Months passed, but the memory of that wedding still lingered, less like a wound, more like a scar I had learned to trace without pain. I wasn't angry anymore. I was awake. There's something powerful about finally seeing people for who they are instead of who you wish they were. It doesn't make you hate them. It just makes you free from needing their love to survive. I had rebuilt my life quietly, piece by piece. My small apartment had become my sanctuary. Painted walls, fresh flowers every Sunday, a growing collection of books and photographs that told my story, not theirs. I found joy in the simple things again. Cooking for myself, walking through the park at sunset, learning that solitude wasn't loneliness, it was peace without permission. And then, one morning the past came knocking. Literally, it was a Sunday. I opened my door to find Clara standing there, dressed impeccably as always, holding a small box. Her smile was nervous, like she'd practiced it in the mirror. "Hey," she said softly. "Can we talk?" I hesitated but stepped aside. Old habits die hard. She sat on my couch, looking around like she was inspecting a stranger's home. "It's nice," she said. "Small, but nice." "Small but mine," I replied. There was a silence that stretched too long. Finally, she exhaled and said, "I came to apologize." I blinked. Of all the things I expected, that wasn't one. She continued, "Mom's been saying we should put things behind us. And honestly, I've been thinking a lot about the wedding. You showing up?" It really made me reflect. I stayed quiet, waiting for the catch. There's always a catch. She looked down at the box and slid it across the table toward me. "I wanted you to have this." Inside was a family photo, taken years ago. We were at a picnic smiling in the sun. Back then it looked like love. Now, it looked like a memory from a life that never really belonged to me. "You were always the emotional one," she said, trying to sound gentle. "And maybe I didn't make things easy. But Lucy, we're sisters. We shouldn't keep holding grudges." I looked at her for a long time. "I'm not holding a grudge, Clara," I said finally. "I just stopped holding on." Her eyes flickered with confusion. "So, what, you've moved on?" "Yes," I said simply. "And that's what makes this different. I used to want you to feel what I felt, to hurt the way I did. But now I realize I don't need your pain to validate mine." Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. For the first time, I saw her not as the golden child, but as a woman terrified of losing control of the story. "I'm glad you came," I said softly, "but I'm not coming back." "Back?" she echoed. "To pretending," I said, "to chasing approval that was never meant for me." She looked away, blinking rapidly. "Mom will be disappointed," I smiled. "She's been disappointed my whole life. I'm finally okay with it." When she left, she didn't hug me. She didn't even look back. But I didn't need her to. That conversation wasn't about reconciliation. It was about release. And for the first time, I felt truly free. That evening, I met Daniel at our usual spot by the riverside. The sky was painted in gold and violet, the city humming in the distance. He noticed the calm in my face before I even spoke. "You saw her," he said. I nodded. "She came to apologize. Did it help?" "In a way," I said. "Not because she changed, but because I did." He smiled. "That's what healing looks like." We walked in silence for a while. Then I said something I hadn't dared to before. "You know what's funny? For years I thought revenge meant making them feel the pain they gave me. But now I think, revenge is just peace with a purpose. It's building a life they can't take credit for." He nodded slowly. "Exactly. The best revenge isn't showing them what they lost. It's showing yourself what you gained." I looked at him then. Really looked and realized that love, the kind my family never understood, had been quietly growing all along. Not just love for him, but love for myself, my story, my survival. We sat on a bench overlooking the river. He reached for my hand, not possessively but gently, as if asking permission. "You've come a long way," he said. "Do you ever think about what's next?" I thought for a moment. Maybe it's not about what's next. Maybe it's about what's now, he smiled. That's the most beautiful answer I've ever heard. Weeks later, an invitation arrived in the mail. My parents were hosting a family dinner to bring everyone together. The irony made me laugh. I almost threw it away, but something in me paused. Maybe closure deserved a full circle, not silence, so I went. Not to prove anything, but to show that the girl who once begged for a seat now owned her presence completely. When I walked in, the room fell silent again, just like it had at the wedding. But this time I wasn't trembling. My mother looked startled, my father awkwardly polite, and Clara expressionless. I smiled. "It's good to see everyone." Dinner was tense at first. They made small talk about jobs, houses, and social appearances. I didn't contribute much. I just listened, because I didn't need to compete anymore. Their world was built on appearances, Mine was built on truth. At one point, my father cleared his throat and said, "Lucy, you've really changed." "I had to," I said softly. "You raised me to follow, but I learned to lead myself." Even Clara looked stunned. I wasn't trying to be poetic. It was just the truth. When dinner ended, I stood up and looked around the table one last time. "Thank you for inviting me," I said. "I know it wasn't easy, but I needed this to say goodbye properly." "Goodbye?" my mother asked, frowning. "Yes," I said. "Not to you. To who I used to be." I left before they could respond. The night air outside was cold, crisp, cleansing, and for the first time, walking away didn't feel like losing anything. It felt like coming home, to myself. That weekend, Daniel and I took a trip to the countryside, a quiet inn by the lake, far from the noise of expectations. On our last evening there, we sat by the fire, sharing stories, laughter, and quiet moments that didn't need words. He looked at me and said, "You know, Lucy, when I met you, you looked like someone searching for something." "I was," I admitted. "But I think I've found it." "What was it?" "Peace," I said. "The kind that doesn't depend on anyone's approval." He smiled, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear. "That's love, Lucy, the real kind." And in that moment, I realized he was right. Love wasn't what they had flaunted at that wedding. It wasn't perfection or validation or applause. It was true. It was growth. It was the courage to walk alone and still feel whole. Months later, when I passed by a wedding venue, I caught a glimpse of another bride through the glass. For a second, I thought of Clara, of that day, of the silence, of the pain. But then I smiled, because none of it hurt anymore. I whispered to myself, not out of bitterness, but gratitude. They hid me from their celebration, but I found something worth celebrating in myself. And as I walked away, I realized something profound. Sometimes, the love you discover in the ruins of betrayal is stronger, purer, and more sacred than any love built on approval. Because the truest revenge is this: to live freely, to love deeply, and to never again wait for an invitation to your own happiness.